asking my future in-laws for money. Sarah Martinez had always been driven. Growing up in a middle-class family in suburban Chicago, she watched her parents work multiple jobs to make ends meet. Her father managed a small auto repair shop during the day and drove for a ride-sharing service at night. Her mother worked as a nurse during the week and cleaned houses on weekends. Despite their exhaustion, they never complained. Instead, they constantly reminded Sarah and her younger brother that education was their ticket to a better life. "You have to work twice as hard to get half as far," her mother would tell her while reviewing homework at the kitchen table after her 12-hour shifts. "But that does not mean you should not try, it means you should try even harder." Sarah took those words to heart. She excelled in school, participated in debate team, and spent summers working at her father's shop instead of lounging by the pool like her friends. She learned early that money meant freedom, security, and choices. While her classmates talked about finding rich husbands, Sarah focused on building her own wealth. College was a struggle financially, but Sarah worked part-time jobs while maintaining excellent grades. She studied business and finance, drawn to the world of numbers and strategic thinking. Her professors noticed her dedication and recommended her for internships at major companies. By her senior year, she had job offers from 3 different firms. Now, at 27, Sarah worked as a senior analyst at a prestigious investment firm in downtown Chicago. Her salary of $170,000 a year was more than her parents had ever earned combined. She owned a beautiful apartment overlooking Lake Michigan, drove a reliable car that was completely paid off, and had a healthy savings account. More importantly, she had options. She could travel, invest, help her parents, or pursue graduate school if she wanted. Sarah met Tim Richardson at a charity fundraiser 2 years ago. He was volunteering at the registration table, his gentle smile and patient demeanor immediately catching her attention. While other men at these events seemed focused on networking and making business connections, Tim genuinely cared about the cause they were supporting, improving literacy rates in underserved communities. "You seem different from the usual crowd here," Sarah had said, approaching him during a break between speakers. Tim laughed, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "I could say the same about you. Most people here write checks and leave. You have been asking real questions about the programs and their effectiveness." Their first conversation lasted 2 hours. Tim told her about his work as a high school English teacher in one of the city's most challenging districts. He spoke passionately about his students, many of whom came from backgrounds similar to Sarah's own childhood. He did not mention his family's wealth or his trust fund. Sarah learned about that much later, and only because she noticed he lived in an expensive neighborhood that seemed impossible to afford on a teacher's salary. "My family has money," Tim had explained simply when she finally asked. "I have a trust fund that gives me some financial freedom. It allows me to teach where I want to teach, not where I need to teach to survive." Sarah respected that Tim chose to work in public service despite his privileged background. Many wealthy people she knew used their money to avoid responsibility, but Tim used his to take on more of it. He worked long hours, spent his own money on classroom supplies, and stayed after school to tutor students who needed extra help. His trust fund was not a crutch, but a tool that allowed him to serve others. Their relationship developed slowly and naturally. Tim appreciated Sarah's ambition and work ethic. He never seemed threatened by her success or uncomfortable with her higher salary. Sarah admired Tim's dedication to his students and his genuine kindness. They complemented each other well, her drive and his compassion, her practical nature and his idealism. After 18 months of dating, Tim proposed during a quiet weekend at a cabin in Wisconsin. The ring was beautiful but not ostentatious, and his proposal was heartfelt and personal. Sarah said yes without hesitation, excited to build a life with someone who understood both her values and her goals. The engagement period had been mostly wonderful. They found an apartment together, planned their wedding, and talked about their future. Tim's parents, Robert and Margaret Richardson, seemed to accept Sarah, though she sometimes felt they were studying her rather than getting to know her. They were polite but formal, asking questions about her family and background that felt more like an interview than casual conversation. The Richardson family wealth was old and established. Robert's grandfather had made a fortune in steel manufacturing in the early 1900s, and subsequent generations had invested wisely in real estate, stocks, and other ventures. The family owned multiple properties, including a mansion in Lake Forest, a vacation home in Aspen, and an apartment in New York City. They donated generously to charities, served on boards of cultural institutions, and moved in social circles that Sarah had only read about in magazines. Despite their wealth, the Richardsons lived relatively modestly day to day. They dressed well but not flashily, drove nice but not extravagant cars, and preferred quiet dinners at home to expensive restaurants. Margaret Richardson was heavily involved in charity work, serving on the boards of several organizations focused on education and the arts. Robert managed the family's investments and served as a trustee for multiple foundations. Tim had grown up in this world of quiet privilege and social responsibility. He attended private schools, spent summers at the family lake house, and was expected to contribute to society in meaningful ways. Teaching was considered an honorable profession in his family, as was medicine, law, or nonprofit work. Making money for its own sake was frowned upon, though the family certainly understood how to manage and preserve wealth. This background made Tim's family different from the flashy, wealthy people Sarah occasionally encountered in her work. They were more subtle, more refined, and more focused on legacy and reputation than on displays of wealth. Sarah found this admirable in many ways, but she also sensed that their values and expectations might not always align with her own. The conversation that would change everything happened on a crisp Sunday afternoon in October. Sarah and Tim had been invited to brunch at his parents' Lake Forest mansion, a tradition that had developed over the months since their engagement. These gatherings were usually pleasant, filled with discussions about current events, family news, and wedding planning details. Margaret Richardson had prepared an elaborate spread in the sun-filled breakfast room overlooking the carefully manicured gardens. Fresh flowers from her greenhouse adorned the table, and she had made Sarah's favorite blueberry scones from scratch. The conversation started normally, with Robert asking about Sarah's recent business trip to New York and Tim sharing funny stories from his classroom. "Sarah, dear," Margaret said as she poured coffee from an elegant silver pot, "Robert and I have been thinking about your future together, and we wanted to discuss something important with you both." Sarah looked up from her plate, sensing a shift in the atmosphere. Tim seemed equally surprised by his mother's serious tone. "Of course," Sarah replied. "What is it?" Robert cleared his throat and leaned forward slightly. "We have been considering what life will look like for you two after the wedding. You both have demanding careers, but we think it would be wonderful if you could focus on starting a family right away." "That is definitely something we want," Tim said, reaching for Sarah's hand. "But we are not in any rush. We want to enjoy being married first, and Sarah has some important projects at work that she wants to complete." Margaret smiled, but Sarah noticed it did not reach her eyes. "That is exactly what we wanted to talk about. Sarah, you have certainly proven yourself in your career, but we think it would be best for everyone if you stepped back from work after the wedding." Sarah blinked, certain she had misunderstood. "I am sorry, what do you mean by step back?" "Well, quit your job, naturally," Robert said matter-of-factly. "Tim needs to establish himself as the head of the household. It is important for his position in the community and his future prospects." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She looked at Tim, expecting him to immediately correct his parents, but he seemed frozen, his coffee cup halfway to his lips. "You want me to quit my job?" Sarah asked slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "It is not that we want you to quit," Margaret said gently. "It is that we think it would be best for your marriage and your future family. Tim comes from a long line of men who have provided for their families. It is part of our family tradition." Sarah felt heat rising in her cheeks. "But I love my job. I have worked incredibly hard to get where I am. My career is important to me." "Of course it is, dear," Margaret continued, her voice taking on a patronizing tone that made Sarah's stomach clench. "But surely you can see that your husband's career and reputation are more important than your personal interests. Tim has responsibilities to his family name and his community standing." "My career is not a personal interest," Sarah said, her voice growing stronger. "It is my profession. It is how I support myself and contribute to society. It is who I am." Robert shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Sarah, you have to understand that in our social circles, it looks unusual for a wife to earn significantly more than her husband. People talk. It affects how Tim is perceived in professional and social settings." "Are you saying that it is embarrassing for Tim that I am successful?" Sarah asked, her disbelief evident in her voice. "It is not embarrassing," Margaret replied quickly. "It is just unconventional, And Tim has such a bright future ahead of him. He could move into administration, perhaps become a principal, or even work for the school district. But people need to see him as a strong leader, not as someone whose wife overshadows him. Sarah turned to Tim, who had been silent throughout this entire exchange. Tim, surely you do not agree with this? Tim looked deeply uncomfortable, his usual confidence completely absent. I have never really thought about it that way. I mean, I have always been proud of your success, but my parents have a point about appearances and community expectations. The betrayal Sarah felt at Tim's words was sharp and immediate. She had expected him to defend her, to stand up for their partnership, to reject his parents' outdated thinking. Instead, he seemed to be considering their position seriously. Appearances, Sarah repeated, her voice rising slightly. You are worried about appearances. What about our partnership? What about the life we have built together? What about respecting each other's goals and dreams? Sarah, please do not get upset, Margaret said in a soothing tone that only made Sarah more frustrated. We are not asking you to give up everything. You could volunteer for meaningful causes, perhaps join some boards, maybe even do some consulting work if you really wanted to stay connected to your field. Volunteer work and consulting are not the same as my career, Sarah said firmly. I have spent years building my reputation and my client relationships. I have goals I want to achieve. I am not ready to give that up to satisfy some outdated social expectations. The silence that followed was heavy and uncomfortable. Robert cleared his throat again, clearly displeased with Sarah's resistance. Sarah, I think you are being a bit dramatic, he said, his voice cooler than before. Tim's trust fund will provide more than enough for both of you to live comfortably. You would not need to work for financial reasons. This is not about financial need, Sarah replied, struggling to keep her voice calm. This is about my identity, my goals, my contribution to the world. Money is not the only reason people work. But it is the primary reason, Margaret said matter-of-factly. And since that need would be met through Tim's family resources, your continued employment becomes unnecessary and potentially problematic. Sarah felt as though she was having a conversation with people from another century. How could they not understand that her career meant more to her than just a paycheck? How could they expect her to abandon everything she had worked for just to make their son look better in social settings? I need some time to think about this, Sarah said, standing abruptly from the table. This is not what I expected when I agreed to marry Tim. Sarah, please, Tim said, finally finding his voice. Let us talk about this rationally. Maybe there is a compromise we can reach. But Sarah was already walking toward the door, her mind reeling from the conversation. She had never felt so misunderstood and undervalued. The people she was about to join as family saw her career, her life's work, as nothing more than an inconvenience to be discarded. Sarah spent the next week in a state of emotional turmoil. She found it difficult to concentrate at work, replaying the conversation with Tim's parents over and over in her mind. She had always known that joining the Richardson family would mean entering a different social world, but she had not realized how dramatically different their values were from her own. Tim tried to discuss the situation several times, but Sarah was not ready to talk. She needed time to process her feelings and figure out what she wanted to say. The man she had fallen in love with seemed to have disappeared, replaced by someone who was willing to consider asking her to sacrifice her career for his family's approval. Finally, on Friday evening, Sarah decided she was ready to have a real conversation about their future. She had spent considerable time thinking about the situation from all angles, and she believed she had found a solution that could work for everyone. Tim, she said as they sat in their living room after dinner, I have been thinking about what your parents said, and I want to discuss it seriously with you. Tim looked relieved that she was finally ready to talk. I am so glad, Sarah. I have been thinking about it too, and I want to find a way to make this work for all of us. Before we go any further, Sarah said, I need to know something. Do you actually agree with your parents that I should quit my job? Tim was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with his answer. I do not know, he admitted finally. I have never thought about it as a problem before, but they made some points that I had not considered. My family has certain expectations and traditions. I grew up thinking that someday I would be the primary breadwinner in my family, like my father and grandfather before me. Sarah felt a stab of disappointment at his honesty, but she appreciated that he was being truthful rather than just telling her what she wanted to hear. I understand that your family has traditions, she said carefully, but I also have my own values and goals. I am not willing to give up my career completely. However, I have been thinking about this situation, and I believe I have found a solution that could satisfy everyone. Tim leaned forward, looking hopeful. What kind of solution? Well, let me explain the financial realities first, Sarah said, pulling out a notebook where she had been working through the numbers. Over the course of my career, I will likely earn much more than you will as a teacher. Even with raises and promotions, your salary will probably never exceed $60,000 a year. My current salary is $170,000, and I expect it to grow significantly over time. Tim nodded, looking slightly uncomfortable with the direct discussion of money but not disagreeing with her assessment. Your trust fund is worth several $1,000,000, Sarah continued, but you cannot access the principal, only the income it generates. Your mother, on the other hand, has significant liquid assets from her own trust fund that she can access freely. That is true, Tim said slowly, but I'm not sure where you are going with this. Sarah took a deep breath. Here is my proposal. If your family truly wants me to give up my career so that you can be the breadwinner, then they should set up a trust fund for me that compensates me for the income I would be giving up. Tim's eyes widened. You want my parents to pay you to quit your job? I want them to ensure that I am financially protected if I make the sacrifice they are asking me to make, Sarah clarified. Think about it, Tim. They are asking me to give up potentially millions of dollars in lifetime earnings. In exchange, they are offering me nothing except the promise that your trust fund will take care of us. Sarah opened her notebook and showed Tim the calculations she had made. If I work for 35 more years, with conservative estimates for raises and promotions, I will earn approximately $8 million over my career. That does not include the money I would make from investing my salary or the value of my pension and other benefits. Tim stared at the numbers, clearly taken aback by the scope of what she would be giving up. So here is what I propose, Sarah continued. Your family establishes an irrevocable trust fund for me. They contribute an amount equal to my current gross salary each year for the next 35 years, with adjustments for anticipated raises and promotions. The trust would be structured so that I would receive the income during our marriage, but the principal would be mine regardless of what happens to our relationship. Sarah, that is a lot of money, Tim said weakly. Yes, it is, Sarah agreed. It is exactly the amount of money you are asking me to give up. If your family can afford to do this, and we both know they can, then everyone gets what they want. You become the breadwinner, I become a stay-at-home wife and mother, and I am financially protected. Tim was quiet for several minutes, clearly processing her proposal. What if my parents say no? Then I have an alternative suggestion, Sarah said. I am willing to sign a prenuptial agreement that gives me 50% of your trust fund in the event of a divorce, but only if I give up my career. This way, I am taking a financial risk by leaving my job, but I am also gaining some security through our marriage. Tim looked uncomfortable with both suggestions. Sarah, I do not think my parents will be happy about either of these ideas. Why not? Sarah asked. They want me to give up my career. I am simply asking for financial security in exchange. That seems reasonable to me. But asking for money from my family, it seems mercenary, Tim said. Sarah felt a flash of anger. Mercenary, Tim, I am not asking for money. I am asking for compensation for a sacrifice. If your family business asked an employee to give up their career to serve the company better, would you expect them to provide some kind of compensation or security? That is different, Tim said. This is about family and marriage. Exactly, Sarah replied. This is about our marriage and our future. I'm trying to find a way to honor your family's wishes while also protecting myself. I'm not asking for charity or handouts. I'm asking for a fair exchange. The next day, Sarah asked Tim to arrange a meeting with his parents so she could present her proposal. She spent the weekend preparing, making sure she had all the financial information organized and her arguments clearly outlined. The meeting took place on Sunday afternoon in the Richardson family's formal living room. Sarah had dressed carefully in a conservative navy suit, wanting to look professional and serious. Margaret and Robert sat across from her on an elegant sofa, their expressions polite but guarded. Tim tells us you have a proposal about your career situation, Robert said without preamble. Yes, Sarah replied, her voice steady despite her nervousness. I have been thinking carefully about our conversation last week, and I believe I have found a solution that addresses everyone's concerns. She outlined her proposal clearly and professionally, explaining the financial calculations and the structure of the trust fund she was suggesting. Margaret and Robert listened without interruption, their expressions growing increasingly cold as she spoke. When she finished, the silence in the room was deafening. Robert's face was flushed with anger, and Margaret looked as though Sarah had suggested something completely offensive. "Are you out of your mind?" Robert finally exploded. "You want us to give you $8 million so you will quit your job. I want you to compensate me for the financial sacrifice you are asking me to make," Sarah replied calmly, though her heart was racing. "This is ridiculous," Margaret said, her voice icy. "You are asking us to pay you to be Tim's wife. That is not how marriage works." "That is not what I am asking," Sarah said firmly. "I am asking for financial security if I give up my career for your family's preferences. This is a reasonable business proposition." "Business proposition," Robert repeated, his voice rising. "This is supposed to be about love and family commitment, not business deals." "Then why are you asking me to make a business decision?" Sarah shot back. "You are asking me to give up my income and my financial independence for social appearances. That is a business decision that affects the rest of my life." The argument continued for nearly an hour, with Tim sitting silently beside Sarah, offering no support. When Sarah presented her alternative proposal about the prenuptial agreement, his parents' reaction was even more negative. "Absolutely not," Margaret said firmly. "You are not entitled to Tim's trust fund. That money has been in our family for generations." "But I would be entitled to it if I give up my career and our marriage fails," Sarah pointed out. "I would be left with nothing while Tim would still have his family wealth." "That is the risk you take when you get married," Robert said coldly. "No one is guaranteeing you anything." Sarah felt the conversation spiraling out of control. These people expected her to give up everything while offering nothing in return except the promise that she would be taken care of as long as she remained married to their son. "I think I need to take some time to consider all of this," Sarah said, standing to leave. "Sarah," Margaret called as she reached the door, "I hope you will think carefully about what is really important here. Marriage is about sacrifice and commitment, not about protecting yourself financially." But as Sarah walked to her car, she could not help but think that marriage should be about partnership and mutual respect, not about one person sacrificing everything for the other person's family expectations. The weeks following Sarah's proposal were tense and difficult. The Richardson family had made it clear that they found her requests completely unreasonable, and Tim seemed caught between his loyalty to his family and his love for Sarah. The wedding planning, which had been a source of joy and excitement, now felt like preparing for a future that might never happen. Sarah found herself questioning everything about her relationship with Tim. She had fallen in love with a man who seemed to respect her independence and ambition, but now she wondered if she had been mistaken about his character. The Tim she thought she knew would never ask her to give up her career without offering something meaningful in return. "I feel like I do not even know you anymore," Sarah said to Tim one evening as they sat in their apartment, the silence between them heavy with unspoken resentment. Tim looked exhausted, his usually bright eyes dull with stress. "I feel the same way about you. The woman I fell in love with was not someone who would ask my family for millions of dollars. The man I fell in love with was not someone who would ask me to give up my career to satisfy his parents," Sarah replied. "And I am not asking your family for millions of dollars. I am asking them to compensate me for the millions of dollars they want me to give up." "It is not the same thing," Tim said, but his voice lacked conviction. Sarah felt tears threatening to spill over. "How is it not the same thing? Tim, I have worked my entire life to build my career. I have sacrificed social events, vacations, and leisure time to get where I am. I have earned my success through hard work and dedication. And now your family wants me to throw it all away because it makes your family look bad." "That is not fair," Tim said. "My family has legitimate concerns about our future and our place in the community." "What about my concerns?" Sarah asked. "What about my future? What about my place in the community? Do those things not matter?" Tim was quiet for a long time, staring out the window at the city lights. "I do not know how to fix this," he admitted finally. "I love you, but I also love my family. I cannot choose between you." "I am not asking you to choose between us," Sarah said. "I'm asking you to stand up for our partnership. I'm asking you to tell your family that my career and my financial security matter too." But Tim seemed unable or unwilling to do that. As the days passed, Sarah realized that she was facing a choice that would define the rest of her life. She could give in to the Richardson family's demands and hope that they would take care of her, or she could stand firm in her principles and risk losing the man she loved. Sarah decided to seek advice from people she trusted. She met with her mentor at work, a successful woman in her 50s who had built her own career in a male-dominated field. "You are being completely reasonable," her mentor told her over coffee. "Any family that asks you to give up your career without offering concrete financial security is not treating you as an equal partner. They are treating you like a decorative accessory." Sarah also talked to her parents, who were torn between wanting her to be happy and worrying about the financial implications of her decision. "Honey," her mother said, "I understand why you are asking for security. But I also worry that approaching marriage like a business transaction might not lead to the happiness you are looking for." "Mom, I am not approaching marriage like a business transaction," Sarah explained. "I am trying to protect myself from a family that wants me to make a huge financial sacrifice while offering me nothing in return." Her father, who had always taught her to be practical about money, supported her position completely. "Sarah, you have worked too hard and come too far to give it all up for someone else's social expectations. If Tim's family wants you to quit your job, they should be willing to make it worth your while." The conversation that finally forced Sarah to make a decision happened on a cold November evening. Tim had been distant and moody all week, and Sarah knew that his family had been pressuring him to end their relationship if she would not back down from her demands. "Sarah, we need to talk," Tim said as soon as she walked into their apartment after work. Sarah set down her briefcase and looked at him, noting the serious expression on his face. "What is it?" "My parents think we should postpone the wedding," Tim said without preamble. "They think we need time to work through our differences before we make such a big commitment." Sarah felt as though she had been punched in the stomach. "And what do you think?" Tim looked away, unable to meet her eyes. "I think maybe they are right. This whole situation has shown me that we might not be as compatible as I thought we were." "Not compatible," Sarah repeated, her voice rising. "Tim, we have been together for 2 years. We have built a life together. We have planned a future together. How can you say we are not compatible?" "Because compatible people would not be fighting about money like this," Tim said. "Compatible people would be able to find a compromise that works for both of them." Sarah stared at him in disbelief. "I offered multiple compromises. Your family rejected all of them without even considering them seriously. I am the only one who has been trying to find a solution that works for everyone." "Your solutions all involve my family giving you money," Tim said. "Maybe that is not what compromise looks like." "Then what does compromise look like?" Sarah asked. "Me giving up everything I have worked for while your family gives up nothing. Me trusting your family to take care of me while having no legal protection if things go wrong. That is not compromise, Tim. That is surrender." Tim stood up and began pacing around the room. "Maybe some things are worth surrendering for. Maybe love is about being willing to sacrifice for the person you care about." "Then why are you not willing to sacrifice for me?" Sarah asked. "Why are you not willing to tell your family that my career and my financial security are important too? Why is all the sacrifice supposed to come from me?" Tim stopped pacing and looked at her with a mixture of sadness and frustration. "Because my family has given me everything. They have supported me, educated me, and provided for me my entire life. I cannot just ignore their concerns because you want me to." "And what have I given you?" Sarah asked quietly. "What has our relationship meant to you?" Tim's expression softened slightly. "You have given me love, companionship, and partnership. Our relationship has meant everything to me." "But not enough to fight for," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "Not enough to stand up to your family when they ask you to choose between their social expectations and my financial security." That night, Sarah made the most difficult decision of her life. She realized that she and Tim wanted fundamentally different things. He wanted a traditional marriage where his family's wishes came first and her career came second. She wanted a partnership where both of their goals and security mattered equally. "I cannot marry you," she told Tim the next morning. "I cannot enter a marriage where I am expected to give up everything while receiving nothing in return. I cannot trust a man who will not stand up for me when his family makes unreasonable demands." Tim looked devastated, but he did not argue with her decision. "I love you, Sarah. I hope you know that." "I love you too," Sarah replied through her tears, "but sometimes love is not enough. Sometimes two people can love each other and still want incompatible things." As Sarah packed her belongings and prepared to move back to her own apartment, she felt a mixture of heartbreak and relief. She was losing the man she loved, but she was keeping her self-respect and her financial independence. She was choosing an uncertain future over a secure but constrained one. 3 months later, Sarah received a promotion at work that came with a significant salary increase. She bought a larger apartment, took a vacation to Europe, and began dating again. She sometimes wondered what would have happened if she had agreed to Tim's family's demands, but she never regretted her decision. Tim sent her a card on her birthday, mentioning that he had left teaching and was working for his family's foundation. He was engaged to a woman from a similar social background who had never had a career of her own. Sarah wished him well and hoped he was happy, but she was grateful that she had chosen a different path. Sarah's mother eventually admitted that she had been wrong to criticize her daughter's approach to the situation. "You were right to protect yourself," she told Sarah. "I was thinking about your happiness, but I was not thinking about your security and independence. Those things matter too." Looking back, Sarah realized that the conversation with Tim's family had revealed something important about their values and expectations. They saw her career as a problem to be solved rather than an achievement to be celebrated. They wanted her to trust them completely while offering her no concrete reasons to do so. They expected her to make enormous sacrifices while being unwilling to make any themselves. Sarah's story became a cautionary tale among her friends and colleagues about the importance of financial independence and the danger of entering relationships where one person is expected to give up everything for the other person's family expectations. She continued to build her career, eventually starting her own consulting firm and becoming financially independent in ways that would have been impossible if she had given up her job. Years later, when Sarah met the man who would become her husband, she was grateful for the painful lesson she had learned with Tim. Her future husband respected her career, supported her ambitions, and never asked her to choose between love and financial security. He understood that true partnership meant both people contributing to their shared future in ways that honored their individual strengths and goals. The experience had taught Sarah that love without respect and security is not enough to build a lasting marriage. She had learned that she could not trust people who asked her to sacrifice everything while offering nothing in return. Most importantly, she had learned that she was strong enough to walk away from a relationship that did not honor her worth, even when it meant giving up someone she loved.